Good evening. I am your bard, your storyteller, your teller of tales, your teller of stories. I am an archibald, and tonight we have Fabulously Creepy Stories, episode 22. Welcome to the stream, Caramel Cactus. It is quite a pleasure to see you today. Or shall I say tonight, whatever your time zone is. Now, tonight we have more stories from Edward Crow. Am I saying that right? Edwin Crow, my mistake. If you like his stories tonight, there is a link down in the About section to his webpage. Now, without further ado, let's get to our first story of the night. Tonight's first story is Babysitting on Halloween, written by Edwin Crow. 25 pounds an hour to look after two little children. For our American viewers, 25 pounds is roughly $32, give or take. I wasn't going to turn that down. It was Halloween night, and I had grown out of it, but it didn't stop their parents from going to a Halloween party of their own. Followed by Janet upstairs. No, I followed Janet upstairs. She whispered as she opened the door to Bobby's room. "That's Bobby. He won't cause you any trouble. He sleeps through the night." I squinted to see the boy who laid in almost darkness in his bed. She closed the door quietly. The only sound, the click of the barrel engaging with the lock. "This is Alice," she said as we entered her room. She was still awake. "This is Helen. She's going to look after you tonight." I knelt down next to her. The sheets were pulled up to her face. "Hey, Alice," I soothed, stroking her hair gently. I looked around the room. "Wow, you really like dolls." She nodded. The whole room was decorated with them. At least 100. I didn't want to tell her they freaked me out a bit. "They look amazing." She smiled. Alice's mom gestured for us to leave. "Good night, Alice," I said as I closed the door behind us. "Thank you so much for doing this on such short notice. You came to us with such a good recommendation. I must say, Alice is a little clingy. We don't get out that often." "That's okay. I had a younger sister myself. She was a real pain too. Had to try to leave her with the family. Have you tried leaving her with the family?" "We don't have much. Just my mother, and she's a little senile now. It's too much to risk to leave Alice with her alone." "Well, we need to get going," I heard Alice's father shout from the bottom of the stairs. "Come in," Janet said quietly. "We will see you around 1 a.m. I hope that's still okay. "Yes, that's fine." I sat in the living room as Alice's parents raced around the downstairs, putting the finishing touches on their costumes. "See you later," Janet said. The dad hovered for a moment, as if conflicted. "Alice," he said before stopping. "She's a little different. She likes to make things up." "We're going to be late," Janet hollered from outside. "Be careful," he said, closing the door behind him. I flinched as I heard the key turn in the lock. I pulled the deadbolt shut. The house was suddenly silent. I waited for the sounds of the car door closing and the vehicle leaving, but it didn't. An unease filled me. I sat on the couch in the living room, dimly lit by the small lamp that stood in the corner. It sent elongated shadows that projected onto the surfaces of the furniture. I checked my Twitter feed for a bit, feeling at a loose end. There was a knock on the door, and it startled me. I got up and I checked the spy hole, expecting one of the parents had forgotten something. Instead, a small boy stood there. I placed my phone on the table in the entryway and picked up the bowl of sweets, then unlocked the door. I squatted down. "Hello there. Would you like some candy?" I thrust the bowl out in front of him. He took a second look down and then his gaze returned to mine. He violently shook his head. "Okay, where are your parents?" He stood in silence. In a whisper, he asked, "Can I come in?" "I don't know who you are, sorry. Do you need me to call someone?" He turned to pick up my phone. No, I'm sorry. I turned and picked up my phone. "Do you know your parents' number?" I asked. When I turned back, the boy was gone. I swiftly shut the door and scanned the house. I wondered if the child had rushed inside when I wasn't looking. I returned to the couch, worried that an intruder might be in the house. Before I could get back to my phone, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Alice emerged. "I'm scared," she said. I saw the glow-in-the-dark patch on her pajamas. "Oh, honey, it's okay," I said, jumping out of my seat and running over to hug her. "What happened?" "Bobby," she said. "Did he come into your room?" She nodded. "Let's get you cleaned up." I took her hand and led her upstairs. Her door was ajar. "Where are your clean clothes?" I asked. She pointed to the dresser, barely lit by the lantern light. I opened the drawers, one at a time, until I found some clean pajamas. "Where are the towels?" She pointed to the bathroom. I entered and picked up a clean towel that rested on the radiator. The fabric was warm to the touch. I cleaned her off and she got into her fresh clothes. Her bed sheets were dry, so I put her back in bed. "Are you okay now?" She nodded. I stayed for a moment, stroking her hair. Her eyes drifted to the dolls. All of them were facing the walls. "Alice, why are the dolls facing the other way?" "They were scared too." I noticed my pulse had increased and a slight clammy wetness had gathered on my brow. I pretended it was fine, though. "Are you scared now?" She shook her head. "Can I turn them back around?" She nodded again. One by one, I turned the dolls. "Not by their heads," Alan said, suddenly annoyed. I don't know if it was her tone or the fact that she saw them as other than inanimate objects, but I relented. I picked them up by their dresses, carefully putting them back into place. When I finished, Alice spoke. "Can I have Jilly?" she asked. "Which one's Jilly?" She pointed to the one in the corner. Its dress was threadbare and the hair was falling out. "Are you sure you want that one and not this one?" I picked up a really nice looking one in the pink dress, but she shook her head. I gave her the dolly. She held it tight, and before I knew it, she was sleeping again. I picked up the soiled clothes, smelling the familiar scent of ammonia. The pajamas were damp. I closed the door and then peeked into Bobby's room. He was fast asleep, just like when I saw him earlier. I jumped as I heard the door to Alice's room violently shake. I dropped the clothes and I opened the door. Alice was fast asleep. My heart was racing. An ice-cold chill tingled down my spine as I saw all the dolls were facing the wall again. Jilly now sat on top of Alice's tall chest of drawers, peering into the room. Way too high for Alice to have put her there. Alice, I said in a hushed tone. All I heard was an ever so slight snore. I contemplated turning the dolls back again, but didn't. They scared me. On edge, I closed the door, feeling all the more alone. As I descended the stairs, I heard another knock on the door. I picked up the candy bowl and unlocked. An old woman stood there. "Who are you?" I said politely. "I'm Helen." I'm sorry, I read that wrong. She said, "Who are you?" She asked politely. "I'm Helen." "What are you doing in my house?" "I'm sorry," I questioned. "Who are you?" "I'm Eunice, Alice's grandmother." I remember what Janet told me. "Hi, Eunice. Could you let me in?" "I'm not sure that's a good idea. Her parents know you're... Do her parents know that you're visiting?" "I'm not visiting," she said, upset. "I really cannot let you in." "Alice is in trouble," she said. She's fine. She's sleeping upstairs." "No. Her brother will try to hurt her." "I think I got this." She moved towards the door and I slammed it in her face. As soon as I did, I felt a pang of remorse. I double-locked the door and peered through the spy hole. She still stood there. I picked up my phone and dialed Janet's number. I jumped as I heard a ringtone from inside the house. I kept the call open, searching the house for the ringing phone. I saw the bright phone lit up in the kitchen as it went to the answer phone. I hung up. I checked Janet's phone to see many missed calls from Mother. A large bang reverberated through the house. It came from upstairs. I dropped the phone and I ran. Alice's door was open. I rushed inside to see her eyes wide open. Her bed was covered in dolls. "What happened?" "Bobby," she said between gasps. "What about him?" He came into my room." It's okay. He's your brother. What's wrong?" "He's under my bed." All the dolls were facing Alice. She couldn't have done that herself and then gotten back into bed. I knelt down and peered under. I jumped when I saw a pair of eyes stare back at me. It was Jilly. "It's only Jilly," I said, picking her up and giving her to Alice. She shook her head before hugging it tightly. Apprehensively, I returned my gaze. There was something else under there, breathing heavily. Let's see, Caramel Cactus, only a fool will let that child in. It is Halloween after all. Who wouldn't let a child into their home on Halloween? I ask you. Really? Pepper Tea, welcome to the stream and thank you so much for your ice cream cone. All donations are welcome here. Now that I believe I left quite enough time on this little cliffhanger, let's continue the story. And pray tell that this mat stops sliding. I shall replace you if you don't behave. Apprehensively, I returned my gaze. There was something else under there, breathing heavily. "Bobby?" I asked. Another set of eyes opened. My body went numb. Petrified, I asked again. Bobby, is that you? He nodded. Why is she scared of me? I don't know, I said, lifting my head up. Why are you scared of Bobby? She began to cry. I looked under again. Will you come out? He wasn't there. I ran into his room and I turned on his light. He was still asleep in his bed. Bobby? I asked, knowing I didn't want to know the answer. Gently, I pulled back the sheets. He didn't move. I placed my hand on his shoulder and turned him onto his back. I screamed. I heard footsteps rush up the stairs. You saw him, didn't you? Janet asked from the landing, her eyes pregnant with tears. I stood there, my lip quivering. She saw him, Harold. You did? The father asked. Janet held her hands together in delight. I stole a final look at the mummified boy in the bed. What did he say? I said nothing. Helen, please tell us. Why is Alice scared of him? Alice saw him? They rushed into her room. I didn't know what to do. Why were they here? Why? What is this in the bed? Janet shrieked. As if pulled out of a daze, I ran into Alice's room. The dolls were gone, and so was Alice. Where is she? Janet shouted at me. I don't know. She was here a minute ago. I was just here. What did you do to her? Why are her pajamas on the floor? Harold blasted. She wet herself, I said in defense. Bull. I ran down the stairs and stopped as I looked in the living room. Eunice was sitting on the couch, stroking Alice's hair. All the dolls were spread out around the living room, all pointing and looking at Alice. Don't run away from me, Howard said, plunging down the stairs. He stopped too. Janet, she's here. He pushed past me and into the living room. Stop, Eunice said, pointing her arm around Alice. What are you doing here? Protecting her from Bobby. Janet arrived and her anger subsided. Hello, honey, she said, creeping into the living room. You have to get rid of that thing up there. Mother, he's only sleeping. No, he isn't, Eunice said. He's dead. You have to move past this. My gaze was drawn to the corner of the room. I saw a scared little boy shake. Do you see him now? Janet asked me expectantly. Bobby began to cry and shook his head violently. I copied him. I think it's best you leave, Harold said. I picked up my coat, my hand shaking, trying to unlock the door. Calmly, he placed his hand on mine, taking the key. Then he opened the door for me. Here, he said, handing me a large wad of cash. It was at least 500 pounds. Please, don't mention what happened tonight. I nodded and ran for my car. I locked the doors as soon as I got in. I jumped when I saw the little boy stand next to the window. I opened it. Hi, Bobby. In a whisper, he asked, "Can I come in?" I shook my head as a single tear rolled down my cheek. "Be a good boy, will you?" He nodded. I pulled away, looking at the rearview mirror to see an empty street. And that is the end of that story. Ah, we see we have a chat going on in chat. Caramel. Pepper is trying to ply him with sugar. She is the child. Well, we all like sweets, don't we? Even though sometimes sweets don't like us back. Even Pepper loves sweets. Caramel, so do I. I just hold that ice cream under the end. Ah, I see. Tricking me with sweets of ice cream. That just might work. He just went to a nice farm upstate. I believe that's a reference I am missing, Caramel. Says the woman with an axe by her icon. The axe just... I forget what the axe means. Did Choppy make you a mod, Pepper? I believe that's what the axe means. Meaning you could axe anybody in the chat. And Caramel says, good. Pepper continues with, it's a nice wooden handle axe. Nothing suspicious. I do prefer the hand axes that I keep underneath my bed. Used to. No need to know where it went. But as I mentioned before, that story was written by Edwin Crow. Link down below if you like his story. Now let's move on to the next fabulously creepy story. This one is called The Haunted Toy Box. So let's begin. I was always creeped out when I visited my aunt's house. My brother made me watch The Shining when I was only 5. My aunt's daughters looked exactly the same as the ones in the film. That alone was enough for me to feign sickness when I was told where we would be going. Unfortunately, that only worked a couple of times, until my mom got wind and made me go no matter how much I played it up. When I did have to go, I spent the time literally clinging to my dad's leg, like an overexcited dog. My cousins rarely came down to say hello. If they did, I'd go white and my mom would finally believe I was sick. That never stopped her from taking me though. We went to leave my aunt's one day and my mother said, "Sorry, honey, you have to stay. Your dad and I have something we need to go to. It's only for a couple of days." I was speechless. My dad left the house and came back with my little Thomas the Tank Engine suitcase. I was mortified. I cried more than I've ever done before. And as I did, the twins came down the stairs and stood there, in their matching blue dresses, just like the film. And I cried more. My aunt came over to try to console me. She knelt in front and said, "It's okay, Ben. Your parents will be back tomorrow night. You remember Jessica and Jennifer?" She gestured over to them. "You can play with them." They smiled at me. I'm sure I was innocent, but in that moment, they appeared the most evil things I've ever laid eyes on, and I cried some more. I remembered watching the clock tick that evening as my aunt watched the television. A minute had never felt so long. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the second hand goes backwards slightly before it finishes its journey to the next second. And in that moment, I thought it was going to stop before changing directions completely. "It's bedtime now," my aunt announced. "Your suitcase is in Jennifer's and Jessica's room." My eyes glazed over, but I fought back the tears. Oh, honey, they won't bite. They are really nice. Let me take you up there. Reluctantly, I took her hand and made our way upstairs. The suitcase was so grand and loomed down on me. Its varnished wood imposing and code. The steps so large, it was like climbing a mountain. The door to their room was open. They sat on the bed, hands in their lap, as if they anticipated my arrival. They were so much taller and older than me. I saw the camp bed that had been set up next to their bed, my green sleeping bag all ready for me. My suitcase was open on the floor of the bedroom. I felt violated. My drawn book and comics spread open and read. You'll take good care of Ben, won't you, girls? My aunt offered. They nodded in unison, broad grins revealing match embraces. I'll see you in the morning, my aunt said, prodding me into the room, closing the door behind me. I turned and stared at my cousins, tears rushing to my eyes. I concentrated as hard as I could to keep them down. Don't go through my stuff, I shouted, zipping my suitcase before dragging it over the floor. Pushing it under the camp bed, I clambered onto the bed and slipped straight into the sleeping bag, pulling it over my chin, squeezing my eyes shut. Would you like to play a game? One of them said. I shook my head. We have Mousetrap. I shook my head again. I heard a sigh. Would you like to meet our sister? No, the other one said. Come on, it will be fun, the first one replied. He's scared of us as it is. Hey, Ben, would you like to meet our sister? I opened my eyes. See, he's interested. One of the sisters stood by the door. The other sat on the bed. You don't have to, she said. There's only two of you, I replied, intrigued. Our other sister lives in the toy box. Jennifer, stop it, Jessica said. I looked over at Jessica. She rolled her eyes. Please, Jennifer, that's enough. I'll leave that up to Ben. Where is she? She's in the toy box. This isn't funny, Jennifer. You'll get us into trouble. I sat up, frightened but excited. Jennifer walked over to the wooden box in the corner of the room and knocked on the lid 3 times. I gripped my sleeping bag, mesmerized. The air felt thick with anticipation as I stared at the box. Then the reply. Knock, knock, knock. I began to scream. Jessica thrust her hand over my mouth. Shh, she said. What did I tell you, Jennifer? Jennifer sprouted a mischievous smile, and heavy footsteps could be heard outside the room. What's going on in here? Nothing, Jennifer replied. Ben, are you okay? I nodded. Jessica's hands now firmly hidden behind her back. My aunt studied everyone's faces before becoming satisfied and leaving. Now no more noise, it's bedtime. She turned off the light and closed the door. Only a small dim nightlight illuminated the room. The sisters got into bed. That was mean, Jessica said. He wanted to meet her though, Jennifer responded. No, he didn't. You made him. Jessica leaned over and said on the side of the bed, I'm so sorry. My sister is not very nice. It's okay, I said, looking up at her. For the first time in my life, I saw her as another person and not the evil twin from The Shining. I closed my eyes, but all I could think of was the knocking of the toy box. I could hear it again in my head. Look, what look what you've done. You've upset him, Jessica said. That's when I realized the sounds weren't make-believe but were coming from the toy box. Just try to sleep, she'll stop, Jennifer said. But the knocking got louder and louder. Mom's gonna hear her. Shh, just try to sleep and she'll stop. But the knocking didn't. It just got louder and louder, until Jennifer got out of bed. I sat up again. She opened the wooden box and put her hand in. I was half expecting to see a shriveled corpse stand up. But what I saw was Jennifer picking up a doll. It was dressed in an identical blue dress, small white socks, and its feet and its head bandaged up. Oh my God, I said. Don't worry, Jennifer said. That's so she can't see. You don't want her to see. She'll sleep with us tonight, Jennifer said, hugging the doll and returning to bed. It's okay, Jane. We're all here. Who's that in the bed over there? That's our cousin, Ben. No, he doesn't belong here, but he's staying here tonight. Stop it, Jennifer, you're scaring him. I was scared. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head and silently cried. I don't know when I fell asleep, but when I woke up, it was morning. I see we have a lot of chatter in chat today. I sure do hope you're all enjoying this fabulous story we have going tonight. Now that is far too much for me to go back and see, but I assume you are all praising the writing we have here and my oratorio skills. Now going back to the story, where were we? Blasted this mask. My eyes hurt when I pulled back the sleeping bag. The curtains let in the mid-morning sun and lit the place up. I turned to face the wall and something touched my hand. I felt around. It felt squishy and made of fabric. I grabbed it and brought it to my face. It was the doll, Jane. The bandages were gone. Her face was burnt and deformed. I screamed. She likes you, Jennifer said, appearing in the doorway. I threw the doll across the room and ran out. I could hear her laughing behind me. My aunt greeted me at the bottom of the stairs as I began to fall. She caught me. What's wrong? It's Jane, I said. What have you girls been telling him? My aunt shouted. The sisters stayed silent. I spent the rest of the day in the living room, watching cartoons. My aunt did her best to make me feel at home, but the minutes dragged. I tried to watch the TV, but my eyes always returned to the clock, watching the second hand labor around its face until my parents arrived early in the evening. As soon as the door opened, I ran and latched onto my dad's leg. What happened? My mother asked. I'm so sorry. I think the girls may have scared him with ghost stories. Can we go, please? Can I have a word with you? My aunt asked my mother. Sure. You go wait in the car with your dad. I was happy to leave that place and never come back. My mother joined us a few minutes later, and we drove off. What were you upset about? She asked. Jane scared me. Who's Jane? The doll from the toy box. My dad scoffed. A doll scared you? Come on, son. It was in my bed. They both laughed. That was the last time I visited my aunt. She died when I was 12. We went back. My parents meeting the other members of the family to divide up her belongings. She hadn't left a will. I spent the time outside the house on my skateboard, waiting for them to finish. When they did, they came out with 3 cardboard boxes. I got back in the car and waited for them to load up the boot. "We've got a surprise for you," my mom said as we drove off. "What is it?" "You'll have to wait till we get home." Excited, I looked in the rearview mirror expectantly, wondering what they had got me. When we arrived home, they unloaded the boot. I went up to my room to play video games. "Ben, come downstairs." I paused my game and ran into the living room. "What is it?" "The girls have gone to college. They said you'd love this." I stopped in my tracks. The wooden toy box sat in the middle of the living room. "What's wrong?" "I don't want that," I demanded. "Don't be silly," my dad said. I'll put it in your room." "No, I don't want that anywhere near me." He opened it. "You can store your games in there. You wanted something like this. You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, lugging the heavy wooden box up the stairs. A few days later, we went to my aunt's funeral. Jennifer and Jessica led the eulogy before my mother stood up and praised her sister and the lovely daughters she had brought up. She was the first person I knew who had died. I didn't know how to feel. My mother cried throughout, my dad holding her hand before gripping her shoulders and doing his best to keep her upright. The coffin was slowly lowered into the grave. The gravediggers then gently filled the hole with dirt. "What's that?" I asked my mother, pointing to the grave marked Mary Grosvenor next to my aunt's. Mary was her daughter. I thought she only had twins. No, she had triplets. What do you mean? Mary Jane. She died of whooping cough when she was still a baby. She was Jennifer and Jessica's sister. I was in a daze for the rest of the day. I attended the wake. I barely spoke with anyone. Jessica and Jennifer were there, but they kept their distance, and I went home. I waited until my parents went to bed, then with all my might, picked up the wooden toy box and carried it into the basement where it stays to this day. I live here now with my own son, my parents unfortunately in the same graveyard as my aunt and Mary. He's asked me if it's okay he plays with Jane. I told him no. He has to go down into the basement, and I tell him never go down into the basement. But it's only a matter of time before he does. Well, I'm quite curious if there is a sequel to this fabulous tale. Wonder if Jane's adventures will continue. Now let's see what we have here. Doesn't even count as a fight for me. Oh, I highly doubt either of you two are actually hearing the story and rather trading barbs with each other. But that is okay, as long as everyone is having a fabulous night. Speaking of, that is the end of that story, and that is going to be the end of tonight's stream. It was a rather short stream, granted, but I do plan on doing a much longer stream next week with several shorter stories, but we'll see how that goes. Till then, I hope you have all the most wonderfully fabulous nightmares. And tomorrow, Choppy will be back to play his video games, I suppose. Till then, good night, everyone.